Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder when I drop my kid off at school and deliver an episode to you while I walk home. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good morning, listeners. It is a chilly March 5th. Colder than it should be on March 5th here in suburban Chicago. I made the decision that it was just above whatever line there was that demanded I walk to school rather than driving the kid. In part because I didn't walk at all yesterday, and in part because I wanted to do a podcast for you. So I guess I have you to thank for my cold nose. That's what it is. Apologies for sniffles. It is pretty chilly today. Maybe 12 degrees without wind chill. So, yikes. We also had a light dusting of snow and the weird phenomenon where the ground is warmer than the pavement. And so the pavement all has snow on it and the ground does not, which is an amusing twist of precipitation and winter. Well, I hope that you're having a pleasant March. Mine is off to a rollicking start, as we've discussed over in the Pick Up and Deliver Guild. My February went okay, but I only got one of my... Did I get two played? I did not get all three of my top of the stack played. I think I only got one of them played, which was a little disappointing. Well, as you'll learn today, I'm off to a much better start here in March. Because today's episode is a shooting from the hip triple shot. For those of you new to the podcast, shooting from the hip is an episode format where I give a brief discussion of a game I've recently played for the first time with the idea of sort of giving first impressions. This is neither a very considered experience because I've only played the game a handful of times at the most, nor is it a review because I try not to do reviews. This is just first impressions. All of it could be wrong, but hopefully you find it amusing nonetheless. So the three games I want to talk about in today's triple shot are Reykholt, Detective: A Modern Crime Story, and Holding On: The Troubled Life of Billy Kerr. I'll give a brief discussion of how each game plays and then talk a little bit about my experience with it. So starting out with Reykholt. Reykholt is a 2018 Uwe Rosenberg game. Rosenberg famous for having done Agricola and Caverna and A Feast for Odin and Bonanza and a number of other games. This is definitely in the line of those worker placement games, particularly like Agricola in that it has to do with farming, but definitely along the lines of trying to take that mechanism and make it a little more palatable for a little less intense audience. I would definitely put this in the medium to light category, not light in terms of people who don't play hobby games could play it, but light in terms of the rules are relatively simple. I think it would take about 5 minutes to teach to anybody who has even a passing experience with worker placement. My wife has never played a worker placement game, or if she has, it was so long ago it didn't quite count, and I still was able to do the whole teaching experience and have her playing competently in 10 minutes. So I would say if you're teaching people who've played any kind of worker placement before, this will be a breeze to teach. Reykholt is themed in Iceland and focused on the Icelandic vegetable farming community, which apparently is quite robust because of the geothermal activity below the crust in Iceland. They use geothermal heat to heat greenhouses and grow lots of vegetables, or so their rulebook tells me. The idea of the game is that you are a vegetable farmer building greenhouses and growing a variety of different kinds of vegetables. In order to progress in the game, you need to spend vegetables in a scaling amount. So like at the beginning of the game, so the way the game works, it's a worker placement game. There's a grid of placement spaces, sort of reminiscent of A Feast for Odin more than Agricola. In Agricola, there's a big grid of spaces and they all give you lots of different things. In A Feast for Odin, it feels it's a bit more constricted in terms of the kinds of things you might get, even though there's more spaces. Like Agricola, you only place one worker at a time in Reykholt, but the grid feels more like the one from A Feast for Odin to me. But there are spaces that give you more greenhouses. There's spaces that let you get and sometimes plant vegetables, and then there's spaces that let you get like the Reykholt version of the cards, the special powers that really make Rosenberg games shine. So there's this small selection of cards that you can get, and the cards give you different gentle bonuses. And I think that from my one play I've done, it seems like the main twist in the game is, reading your opponents, trying to figure out where they're going to go, maximizing your efficiency, and then figuring out which of those bonuses you want to go for and learning to use those. So that's the overall idea. The two interesting mechanisms for managing your marketplace. One is you get these greenhouses, and they'll have between 6 and 3 planting spots. And then there's an action called seeding, where you're planting things in the greenhouse. And the way that works is you have to have a vegetable in supply that's eligible for that greenhouse, like let's say tomatoes. So you put one tomato in one of the growing spots in that greenhouse. And then from the supply, you fill up all the other growing spots in the greenhouse with that vegetable. So you might have a greenhouse that's got 4 spots. You put 1 cabbage in it. You get to put in 3 more cabbage from the supply. And then there are harvest actions that let you take 1 vegetable out of the greenhouse. And at the end of each round, you're going to take 1 vegetable out of each greenhouse you have. So there's a kind of slow release of the vegetables you have. Now the big restriction there is you can't seed a greenhouse unless it's completely empty. So if you have 1 left in there and you get a seed action, you can't fill that greenhouse back up. So that's an interesting tension. Then after you've done your harvest, then there's a movement phase where you have this track around the edge of the board, and you're sort of building up a bigger and bigger fruit stand for tourists, or vegetable stand for tourists to shop from. And this is represented by spending vegetables in ever increasing amounts. So like the first space that you advance on the vegetable track, you spend 1 tomato. Then you have to spend 1 lettuce, 1 cauliflower, 1 mushroom, and 1 carrot, in that order, in order to advance the 5 spaces. Then you have to spend 2 tomatoes, and 2 lettuce, and 2 cauliflower, and so on. You can advance as many spaces in 1 round as you want, as long as you have the vegetables to pay. You also may, once per round, advance by taking the vegetables from the supply instead of paying them. So that it's a nice thing where maybe you don't have any cauliflower this turn, so you're able to pay the tomato, the lettuce, the mushroom. Then you could take 1 cauliflower, and then if you have a carrot, you could pay the carrot and you move again. So you get to take once and pay the rest of the times to move your character forward. At the end of the game, the person whose character is furthest around the track wins. It's an interesting game, not as crunchy as something like Agricola, but it also takes between a half an hour and an hour to play, whereas Agricola, a short game, is 90 minutes. So this one definitely fits the end of the night, you have 45 minutes left to play kind of game. It feels like right in that tasty, it's heavier than a filler, but medium length game. And in that regard, it's quite delightful. I enjoyed Reykholt quite a bit. It looks like there's going to be a lot of variety because there's 5 different sets of those, what are they called? The special power cards. And so using a different set of those would change your strategy some. There's also a story mode, which I haven't even looked into yet, and a solo mode. So I think I'm going to get plenty of play out of Reykholt. Also, the playtime of 45 minutes to an hour means that it'll come to the table a bit more than something like Agricola, which is a game I really enjoy, but I play, on the table maybe once a year. I've been playing it online a lot because I can take a turn a day, and then I get a play of it over a month. But So that's Reykholt. That's the first game. Whoa, and I used way more than... I used like half my walk home at least on that one game. So see, I may not get to the third game. So with that in mind, actually, I'm going to do Holding On, The Troubled Life of Billy Kerr first. Now, this is a game that's gotten a lot of buzz over the last 6 months. If you listen to podcasts, you have probably heard discussions of it. If it's completely unfamiliar to you, Holding On is a sort of story-focused game built around the idea that you are a team. It's a cooperative game where you're a team of hospice workers trying to keep alive a man who is dying. He has had a heart attack on a flight from Sydney to London, and he's now in your care, and he's not doing great. And the point of the game is each turn you have to pick whether you're going to do medical care to help keep him alive, or you're going to do palliative care to make him comfortable and help him remember more about his life, but then his health slips sometimes. So you're kind of balancing between the two. There's a bunch of little fiddly mechanisms about whether or not you're doing well and how long each nurse can work before they have to go home because they're overstressed. And that's an interesting puzzle part of the game. We played 4 games of it. Scenarios 1, 2, and 3, and we failed scenario 3 twice. So the 4 games I played of it involved scenarios 1, 2, and 3. The story that's emerging is pretty interesting, and I would be kind of keen to see the way that the game will progress. However, the game itself is not great. You know, the puzzle is interesting, and I think given the right extra components, it would remain pretty interesting. However, one of the big things is each round you're trying to uncover a certain set of clear memories from Billy. But there are 30 memory cards in the grid, and it's the same 30 memories the whole time. So already by the 4th play, we'd seen something like 80% of the memory cards just by the random chance of when you get them. And there's not more to find. So I feel like by the time we get to number 7 or number 8 of the 10 scenarios, there would be nothing new except trying to finish the round so that we can get the additional story element. And that part's a little disappointing because in a story-driven game, you want new story to be constantly there. And I think, you know, a game like Arkham Horror, the card game, the story emerges as you're playing. Going from room to room causes the story to emerge. New mechanisms come out that cause the story to emerge. And there might be some of that. It's fair. I've only played the 3 scenarios. And there's definitely a phone call thing where you get to call one of Billy's relatives. I don't understand how that would work particularly, but there's a bunch of different things in there. And maybe there's more story elements that come out later that I don't know about. But based on the 3rd play, the amount of story there is not... It's hard to justify the amount of time it would take. That said, I think a 2-player game, you could snap this out in 20 minutes or half an hour, just because you come to understand how the mechanism works and you can go a little faster. So maybe as the game goes along, the new memories don't matter quite so much because you get into the puzzle of it. And it's about solving the puzzle and pushing your luck at certain times to kind of get through. So that's Holding On, The Troubled Life of Billy Kerr. An interesting game and worth playing if you get a chance. But I would probably hold off buying it if I were you. I know I will. I'll borrow it from my buddy if I want to find out how the story ends. And finally, I'm going to give a very quick snapshot of the last new game I wanted to talk about today. And that's Detective: A Modern Crime Story. You know what? Oh, I'm backing up. So actually, I'm going to give a different shooting from the hip of a game that we played this weekend called Roll For It. Roll For It's a very simple push your luck game. Each player has a set of 6 dice, and on the table there are some goal cards that are kind of like different goals you're trying to get in Yahtzee or something. And the interesting thing about the game is when you roll, you can put your dice toward any combination of these cards on the board, and then you stop when you feel like stopping. Or actually, you just roll once and you put the dice that fit toward it, and then you're done with your turn. And on your next turn, you can put more dice toward it. But if someone else solves the card in the meantime with their dice, you just get yours back, and now your turn was sort of wasted. It's an amusing little appetizer of a game. It would be a nice beginning of the night or end of the night kind of starter, or if you're trying to play with kids or somebody who doesn't really want to tackle a longer game or wrestle with more complex rule sets, the level of complexity of this game is very light and a really good introductory game for people who don't play a lot of hobby games. So that's my quick evaluation of roll for it. The deluxe edition we have, so it's got two different sets of goal cards and a tin. Hoo-hoo. So that's it. I will talk about Detective: A Modern Crime Story in another episode. So what have you been playing lately? Do you have new games that have hit the table that you could give us a quick impression of? Pop over to Board Game Geek Guild 3269 and let us know your experiences. And otherwise, I look forward to seeing you next time. I hope your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.